Tales from My Childhood, written by Roald Dahl. When I was 12, my mother said to me, I have entered you for Marlborough and Repton. Which would you like to go to? Both were famous public schools, but that was all I knew about them. Repton, I said. I will go to Repton. It was an easier word to say than Marlborough. Very well, my mother said. You shall go to Repton. We were living in Kent then, in a place called Bexley. Repton was up in the Midlands near Derby and some 140 miles away to the north. That was of no consequence. There were plenty of trains. Nobody was taken to school by car in those days. We were put up on the train. I was exactly 13 in September 1929 when the time came for me to go to Repton. On the day of my departure, I had first of all to get dressed for the part. I had been to London with my mother the week before to buy the school clothes, and I remember how shocked I was when I saw the outfit I was expected to wear. I can't possibly go about in those, I cried. Nobody wears things like that. Are you sure you haven't made a mistake? My mother said to the shop assistant. If he is going to Repton, madam, he must wear these clothes, the assistant said firmly. And now this amazing fancy dress was all laid out on my bed, waiting to be put on. Put it on, my mother said. Hurry up, or you will miss the train. I will look like a complete idiot, I said. My mother went out of the room and left me to it. With immense reluctance, I began to dress myself. First, there was a white shirt with a detachable white collar. This collar was unlike any other collar I had seen. It was as stiff as a piece of perspex. At the front, the stiff points of the collar were bent over to make a pair of wings, and the whole thing was so tall that the points of the wings, as I discovered later, rubbed against the underneath of my chin. It was known as a butterfly collar. To attach the butterfly collar to the shirt, you needed a back stud and a front stud. I had never been through this rigmarole before. I must do this properly, I told myself. So, first I put the back stud into the back of the collar band of the shirt. Then I tried to attach the back of the collar to the back stud, but the collar was so stiff I couldn't get the stud through the slit. I decided to soften it with spit. I put the edge of the collar into my mouth and sucked the starch away. it worked. The stud went through the slit and the back of the collar was now attached to the back of the shirt. I inserted the front stud into one side of the front of the shirt and slipped the shirt over my head. With the help of a mirror, I now set about pushing the top of the front stud through the first of the two slits in the front of the collar. It wouldn't go. The slit was so small and stiff and starchy that nothing would go through it. I took the shirt off and put both the front slits of the collar into my mouth and chewed them until they were soft. The starch didn't taste of anything. I put the shirt back on again, and at last I was able to get the front stud through the collar slits. Around the collar, but underneath the butterfly wings, I tied a black tie using an ordinary tie knot. Then came the trousers and the braces. The trousers were black with thin pinstriped grey lines running down them. I buttoned the braces on the trousers, 6 buttons in all. Then I put on the trousers and adjusted the braces to the correct length by sliding 2 brass clips up and down. I put on a brand new pair of black shoes and laced them up. Now for the waistcoat. This was also black and it had 12 buttons down the front and 2 little waistcoat pockets on either side, one above the other. I put it on and did up the buttons, starting at the top and working down. I was glad I didn't have to chew each of those buttonholes to get the buttons through them. All this was bad enough for a boy who had never before worn anything more elaborate than a pair of shorts and a blazer. But the jacket put the lid on it. It was not actually a jacket. It was a sort of tailcoat, and it was without a doubt the most ridiculous garment I had ever seen. Like the waistcoat, it was jet black and made of heavy serge-like material. In the front, it was cut away so that the two sides met only at one point, about halfway down the waistcoat. Here there was a single button and this had to be done up. From the button downwards, the lines of the coat separated and curved away behind the legs of the wearer and came together again at the backs of the knees, forming a pair of tails. These tails were separated by a slit, and when you walked about, they flapped against your legs. I put the thing on and did up the front button. Then I crept downstairs. My sisters shrieked with laughter when I appeared. "He can't go out in those," they cried. "He will be arrested by the police." "Put your hat on," my mother said, handing me a stiff, wide-brimmed straw hat with a blue and black band around it. I put it on and did my best to look dignified. My sisters fell all over the room laughing. My mother got me out of the house before I lost my nerve completely, and together we walked through the village to Bexley station. My mother was going to accompany me to London and see me onto the Derby train, but she had been told that on no account should she travel farther than that. I had only a small suitcase to carry. My trunk had been sent on ahead, labeled luggage in advance. Nobody is taking the slightest notice of you, my mother said as we walked through Bexley High Street. And curiously enough, nobody was. I have learnt one thing about England, my mother went on. It is a country where men love to wear uniforms and eccentric clothes. 200 years ago, their clothes were even more eccentric than they are today. You can consider yourself lucky you don't have to wear a wig on your head and ruffles on your sleeves. I still feel an ass, I said. Everyone who looks at you, my mother said, knows that you are going to a public school. All English public schools have their own different crazy uniforms. People will be thinking how lucky you are to be going to one of those famous places. We took the train from Bexley to Charing Cross and then went by taxi to Euston Station. At Euston, I was put on the train for Derby with a lot of other boys who all wore the same ridiculous clothes as me, and away I went. The headmaster, while I was at Repton, struck me as being a rather shorty, bandy legged little fellow with a big bald head and lots of energy, but not much charm. Mind you, I never did know him well because in all those months and years I was at the school, I doubt whether he addressed more than 6 sentences to me altogether. So, perhaps it was wrong of me to form a judgment like that. What is so interesting about this headmaster is that he became a famous person later on. At the end of my third year, he was suddenly appointed Bishop of Chester and off he went to live in a palace by the River Dee. I remember at the time trying to puzzle out how on earth a person could suddenly leap from being a schoolmaster to becoming a bishop all in one jump, but there were bigger puzzles to come. From Chester, he was soon promoted again to become Bishop of London, and from there, after not all that many years, he bounced up the ladder once more to get the top job of them all, Archbishop of Canterbury. And not long after that, it was he himself who had the task of crowning our present Queen in Westminster Abbey, with half the world watching him on television. Well, well. And this was the man who used to deliver the most vicious beatings to the boys under his care. By now, I am sure you will be wondering why I lay so much emphasis upon school beatings in these pages. The answer is that I cannot help it. All through my school life, I was appalled by the fact that masters and senior boys were allowed literally to wound other boys and sometimes quite severely. I couldn't get over it. I never have got over it. It would, of course, be unfair to suggest that all masters were constantly beating the daylights out of all the boys in those days. They weren't. Only a few did so, but that was quite enough to leave a lasting impression of horror upon me. It left another more physical impression upon me as well. Even today, whenever I have to sit for any length of time on a hard bench or chair, I begin to feel my heart beating along the old lines that the cane made on my bottom some 50 years ago. There is nothing wrong with a few quick, sharp tickles on the rump. They probably do a naughty boy a lot of good. But this headmaster we are talking about was not just tickling you when he took out this cane to deliver a flogging. He never flogged me, thank goodness, but I was given a vivid description of one of these ceremonies by my best friend at Repton, whose name was Michael. Michael was ordered to take down his trousers and kneel on the headmaster's sofa with the top of his body hanging over one end of the sofa. The great man then gave him one terrific crack. After that, there was a pause. The cane was put down and the headmaster began filling his pipe from a tin of tobacco. He also started to lecture the kneeling boy about sin and wrongdoing. Soon, the cane was picked up again and a second tremendous crack was administered upon the trembling back. Then, the pipe filling business and the lecture went on for maybe another 30 seconds. Then came the third crack of the cane. Then the instrument of torture was put once more on the table and a box of matches was produced. A match was struck and applied to the pipe. The pipe failed to light properly. A fourth stroke was delivered, with the lecture continuing. This slow and fearsome process went on until 10 terrible strokes had been delivered, and all the time, over the pipe lighting and the match striking, the lecture on evil and wrongdoing and sinning and misdeeds and malpractices went on without a stop. It even went on as the strokes were being administered. At the end of it all, a basin, a sponge, and a small clean towel were produced by the headmaster to clean the whole body and return to his classroom. Do you wonder then that this man's behavior used to puzzle me tremendously? He was an ordinary clergyman at that time, as well as being headmaster, and I would sit in the dim light of the school chapel and listen to him preaching about the Lamb of God and about mercy and forgiveness and all the rest of it, and my young mind would become totally confused. I knew very well that only the night before this preacher had shown neither forgiveness nor mercy in flogging some small boy who had broken the rules. So, what was it all about? I used to ask myself. Did they preach one thing and practice another, these men of God? And if someone had told me at the time that this flogging clergyman was one day to become the Archbishop of Canterbury, I would never have believed it. It was all this, I think, that made me begin to have doubts about religion and even about God. If this person, I kept telling myself was one of God's chosen salesmen on earth, then there must be something very wrong about the whole business. Every now and again, a plain grey cardboard box was dished out to each boy in our house, and this, believe it or not, was a present from the great chocolate manufacturers Cadbury. Inside the box, there were 12 bars of chocolate, all of different shapes, all with different fillings, and all with numbers from 1 to 12 stamped on the chocolate underneath. 11 of these bars were new inventions from the factory. The 12th was the control bar, one that we all knew well, usually a Cadbury's coffee cream bar. Also in the box was a sheet of paper with numbers 1 to 12 on it, as well as two blank columns, one for giving marks to each chocolate from 0 to 10 and the other for comments. All we were required to do in return for this splendid gift was to taste very carefully each bar of chocolate, give it marks, and make an intelligent comment on why we liked it or disliked it. It was a clever stunt. Cadbury's were using some of the greatest chocolate bar experts in the world to test out their new inventions. We were of a sensible age, between 13 and 18, and we knew intimately every chocolate bar in existence, from the milk flake to the lemon marshmallow. Quite obviously, our opinions on anything new would be valuable. All of us entered into this game with great gusto, sitting in our studies and nibbling each bar with the air of connoisseurs, giving our marks and making our comments. Too subtle for the common palate was one note that I remember writing down. For me, the importance of all this was that I began to realize that the large chocolate companies actually did possess inventing rooms, and they took their inventing very seriously. I used to picture a long white room like a laboratory with pots of chocolate and fudge and all sorts of other delicious fillings bubbling away on the stoves, while men and women in white coats moved between the bubbling pots, tasting and mixing and concocting their wonderful new inventions. I used to imagine myself working in one of these labs, and suddenly I would come up with something so absolutely unbearably delicious that I would grab it in my hand and go rushing out of the lab and along the corridor and right into the office of the great Mr. Cadbury himself. I have got it, sir, I would shout, putting the chocolate in front of him. It's fantastic, it's fabulous, it's marvelous, it is irresistible. Slowly, the great man would pick up my newly invented chocolate and he would take a small bite. He would roll it round his mouth. Then, all at once, he would leap up from his chair, crying, "You have got it! You have done it! It's a miracle!" He would slap me on my back and shout, "Well, we will sell it by the million. We will sweep the world with this one. How on earth did you do it? Your salary is doubled." It was lovely dreaming those dreams, and I have no doubt at all that 35 years later, When I was looking for a plot for my second book for children, I remembered those little cardboard boxes and the newly invented chocolates inside them, and I began to write a book called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Thanks for listening.